A lot of the information out there in the world today is second-hand information. What's unique about Human Rights Watch's work is that we get out there in the front line where the abuses are taking place. We interview the key people, the eyewitnesses, victims, even perpetrators of human rights abuses. This is first-hand information.
Okay, how many bodies do you think you saw?
Like a crushing of the skull?
Yeah, it was like...
We will also look at the site of the crime. We'll try to collect physical evidence. We'll take photographs. Sometimes we even use satellite imagery. But at the heart of what we do is the testimony of the victim and the testimony of the eyewitness.
We speak to dozens and dozens of people to corroborate their stories and to cross-check them in order to present as complete as possible a picture of what happened.
Our initial investigation was primarily focused on what happened in southern Kyrgyzstan in mid-June. What we did know is that lots of people died and that there was massive destruction of civilian property.
Они закрыли их домой, вот подвал, и потом сожгли их.
Mama, brat, bratishka.
7 members of our family were killed.
During our research, we interviewed more than 200 people. We interviewed victims, witnesses, doctors, police forces, security forces.
We were there before the fighting started, we were there during the fighting, immediately after, documenting abuses by both sides.
In the course of 4 days, almost 2,000 houses were burned down, and the vast majority of them were in Uzbek neighborhoods. Both the Kyrgyz and the Uzbeks and the local authorities have their own narratives about what happened. And what we establish is an objective narrative.
What we try to focus on is the actual participation of the security forces in the violence.
We got a call saying that there was a sweep operation taking place in Nariman. We immediately went there, and as we arrived at the hospital, people were coming in who had been beaten earlier that morning. Many of the people who came were showing us their passports, documents that had been torn up or burned by the security forces. Because of our immediate reporting, that was the first and only large-scale sweep operation.
Human Rights Watch puts an enormous premium on the accuracy and the objectivity of our fact-finding. But we don't stop there. Once we have the information, we deploy it in as aggressive a way as possible.
When we were poised to report on abuses connected with Philip Morris International, we found that company very sensitive and very eager to respond to our concerns.
We started to look into allegations of child labor and forced labor and other labor rights violations in the tobacco sector in Kazakhstan.
Yes.
The researcher Jane Buchanan did the fieldwork, investigated and interviewed the victims, established that there were in fact serious abuses taking place, and then working backwards, we identified the fact that Philip Morris was the sole company involved in sourcing this tobacco. Then we contacted Philip Morris, and they conducted their own investigation and acknowledged the problems that we had highlighted to them.
And in fact, Philip Morris took on our key recommendations in Kazakhstan.
Everybody knows when a Human Rights Watch report is coming out that it's going to contain solid information. And the fact that it contains solid information about child labor and forced labor associated with one of the world's largest and most recognizable companies isn't good for that company, and they recognize that. The report created a huge international outcry, and it launched an immediate congressional inquiry.
In this lawless no-man's land, no one except Anna was bothering to report this crime spree or speak to the victims. Some of the investigations that we've done in various parts of the world have often relied as a first-hand witness on Human Rights Watch.
As far as human rights organizations are concerned,
Police are taking the law into their own hands. They're acting as a vigilante force.
There's an estimated 17,000 disappeared.
Le directeur France de Human Rights Watch est avec nous. Bonjour.
Bonjour. Many newspapers and broadcasters are actually cutting back on their overseas reporting, and therefore they look to Human Rights Watch, which conducts investigative human rights reporting, original research in countries where journalists no longer can afford necessarily to go. If we weren't doing that work, those stories would simply not see the light of day.
The testimony of the witnesses that Human Rights Watch speaks to is always challenged by governments. They say, those people don't know what they were talking about. Those people were hysterical.
I just saw 70 men in Maya all like that in a canal by the side of the road.
When I was in Kosovo, I was standing on a border and watching tens and hundreds of thousands of Kosovo refugees leave. In Serbia, at that time, the Ministry of Information was telling the world that Christiana Amanpour was paying refugees to walk around me and to walk around my camera in circles. There was no crisis, there was no exodus, there was no problem whatsoever. At every turn, there are powerful interests trying to hide the truth.
In a place like Chushka, when we put together the story of the massacre in that little village, we didn't have access to that village at the time. Kosovo was closed at the time. But we took enough testimony and we corroborated it carefully enough that when we went back to Chushka after the war was over, we found that all the testimony they gave us was exactly accurate.
People told us in my village 12 men were missing. We went back to that village and there were 12 graves. As an offhand remark, someone mentioned a box of photographs. They were pictures that paramilitaries, local security forces had taken of themselves. So I asked to scan the photos and started to show them to people. And I remember very well, my laptop was so old and the image was big, it took probably 20 seconds, the image would sort of roll up the screen, you know. She let out this gasp and pointed her finger saying, I know that guy. That guy was here.
In the case of Chushka, Human Rights Watch played a key role in providing the core evidence to prosecutorial authorities. As Serbia evolved and as it developed a national justice system, we were able to present the detailed evidence that allowed the national court system to prosecute 11 years later, but to prosecute nonetheless.
So today, suspected perpetrators of the Chushka killings are in custody and going to face trial in Serbia by a Serbian war crimes court.
Our researchers are people who have followed some of the worst stories and the worst tragedies that can befall human beings. What makes it possible to keep hearing those stories is knowing that they're making lasting change.
Immediately after we had conducted our initial research, we met with the president of Kyrgyzstan and we presented our findings. We also stressed the importance of an international investigation into these events. And we know that just a couple of days later, she sent a request for an investigation just like that. And then in August, when we released our report, we had a long meeting with her and we presented our recommendations for what needed to be done.
It's life and death. If it's not brought to light, people are going to die. And they're going to die without us paying any attention. They're going to get slaughtered and raped and nobody's going to say anything about it or do anything about it. If you do pay attention, eventually it stops.
Human Rights Watch is very small. We're fewer than 300 people. We're armed with pencils and notebooks and cameras and tape recorders and the mission to tell the truth. That's all Human Rights Watch has. The truth, when it's told, really does change lives.